We are joined by a man who has spent plenty of time with John Corzine, Bloomberg View columnist Bill Cohan. He interviewed Corzine several times for his book Money and Power, How Goldman Sachs Came to Rule the World. Bill, should anyone feel sorry for John Corzine?
Oh, no. But Eric, this is, I think, a mind-blowing story. I mean, it makes me nostalgic for the good old days of 3 years ago, you know, when these all-weekenders, not all-nighters, but all-weekenders would take place. You would have thought securities firms would have learned a lesson from 3 years ago, and John Corzine...
This wasn't supposed to happen again, was it?
This wasn't supposed to happen again. And John Corzine, you know, when I interviewed him, we talked mostly about Goldman, but he also, we were sitting in his MF Global offices. He had just gotten there. He talked to me about how he was going to transform it, how it was a little too sleepy, how they didn't know how to take risks, how they weren't going to be big risk takers, and he was going to transform it into more of a Goldman Sachs-like risk-taking operation. So it's absolutely shocking that this would happen.
Does Corzine know how to take moderate risk? Last week, we were joined by a former Goldman colleague of his, Robert Kaplan, who said, this man goes big.
John Corzine made his bones at Goldman Sachs by going big. Okay, really, he told me the last time he really traded, like on a desk, day-to-day trader, was 1986. It's 25 years ago. And why did he do it? He set up a trade about buying one yield of Treasury security and selling short another yield of Treasury security. The trade didn't work. It blew up. He had to go back onto the desk and turn a $150 million loss, which in 1986 was big money, into a squeaky $10 million gain. That time, he spent 7 months turning that trade around. That time put him onto a higher trajectory at Goldman Sachs. But then, you know, frankly, they did it all again in 1994 and almost sunk the firm.
What's his relationship today with Goldman? Last week, we actually heard Goldman could be a potential buyer. Could that happen?
Well, why not? Goldman sees an opportunity and swoops in and think about buying it at low prices? Sure. I mean, he doesn't have any relationship per se with the people who work there now, other than on some sort of, you know, friendly. He worked with a lot of them, but, you know, he's not going to go back there. Erik.
Let's think about John Corzine's history for a moment here. You talked about trading in 1986. John Corzine was the co-head of fixed income at Goldman Sachs when that division nearly brought the firm to its knees in 1994.
Yes.
It makes me wonder, Bill, whether the run on the bank quality that is evident in MF Global's collapse over the past week has anything to do with the fact that John Corzine has some enemies out there, people whom he worked with at Goldman Sachs. The folks, for example, who saw what he and Goldman Sachs did with long-term capital management, going in there, taking all the information on their trades, effectively trading against them. Corzine quoted in another book, possibly even yours too, saying, hey, you know, we had to protect Goldman Sachs' interests. I'm not going to apologize for that.
Right, that was another bad incident. I mean, at least that wasn't a trading incident. That was sort of a vulture-like taking advantage incident. You know, people made the same claim, Erik, as you well know, about Jimmy Kane and Bear Stearns from long-term capital management. Bear Stearns famously not participating in the bailout of long-term capital management, and that's why people sought to bring down the firm. You know, I don't really see it that way. I see this as a case of John Corzine ramping up the risk that MF Global was taking, trying to put it into the big leagues of investment banking, make it more like Goldman Sachs, not having the systems in place, making a bad bet, and not being able to work out of it. And then all the financing ran. I mean, you know, it just blew away over the last week.
Corzine just joined the firm last year. Who else is running the show? Who's on the board there, and what's their involvement?
Well, I mean, this is, of course, you know, the biggest investor, single investor, is Chris Flowers. So you go back to, I mean, this story has all the great characters, because Chris Flowers, who's supposed to be like the master of the universe when it comes to financial institutions investing, you know, he and John Corzine have been thick as thieves for years. I mean, one of the reasons John Corzine lost his job at Goldman was because of his involvement with Chris Flowers, and Hank Paulson, you know, hated that combination and what they were doing and blew it up. So it is, I mean, it's really shocking. I have to say, it is just really shocking that these two guys could blow up this firm when they, frankly, were supposed to turn around and make everybody, you know, wealthy about it.
Isn't that shocking, Bill? I mean, this is a high-stakes business. This is not a quote-unquote SIFI, right? This is not a Goldman Sachs. This is not a Morgan Stanley. It doesn't have the same degree of regulatory attention. That's why John Corzine had the opportunity to do the kind of prop trading that he did.
That's how he was attracting talent.
Yes, yeah, but Erik, I got to say, in the wake of 2008, when we all should have learned a lesson, and this was relatively staid. As John Corzine told me himself, it was a relatively staid, not risk-oriented firm, and he needed to ratchet up the risk. Well, he does that, and it blows up in his face, and for the first time, he can't unwind the trade. Honestly, I'm still shocked. I'm shocked, and it should not have happened. Should not have happened.
Paul Volcker would be proud of you, Bill.
Thank you. I'm glad to be one of his troops.
To say that you're shocked and that perhaps
there was
relatively staid
here.
Isn't such a bad thing after all, maybe in the world of the post-crisis world of Wall Street. Bill Cohan, Bloomberg View columnist, author of Money and Power: How Goldman Sachs Came to Rule the World.